They said time would heal me. They were wrong, because standing at my husband's grave wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was loving someone else after I buried him. My name is Maame Serwah. In Ghana, people knew me as the woman who lost her husband too soon. The woman whose smile disappeared overnight. The woman everyone treated gently, like grief had made me fragile. His name was Kwame Osei, my late husband. Kwame was a researcher, quiet, focused, endlessly curious about the past. He believed history still had secrets buried beneath the earth, waiting for the right hands to uncover them. His final project took him to Scotland. He never came back. They told me it was an accident, a collapse at a research site, a tragedy wrapped in official reports, condolences, and silence. I accepted it because asking questions felt like reopening a wound that had barely closed. 1 year after his burial, I returned to Scotland, not as a wife, but as a widow. I told myself I wasn't searching for answers. I just wanted to see the place that had taken my husband away from me. The research site was colder than I expected. The wind cut through my coat, sharp and unforgiving. That's where I met Callum Reid. He didn't rush toward me with sympathy, didn't ask who I was or why I was there. He simply stood beside me and said quietly, "Your husband had a good eye. This site mattered to him." That was all. No pity, no awkward silence, just respect. And somehow, that hurt more than condolences ever had. Over the next few days, Callum became a quiet presence in my grief. He was a Scottish archaeologist, calm, observant, deeply patient. He never tried to fix me, never filled my silence with unnecessary words. When I cried, he didn't look away. When I grew quiet, he let the quiet stay. For the first time since Kwame died, I didn't feel like someone people were afraid to touch. But grief is loyal. It reminds you of the dead the moment you start to feel alive again. I hated myself for laughing at Callum's dry humor, for noticing the warmth in his voice, for feeling something stir inside me when I thought my heart was done. One evening, as the sky darkened over the hills, Callum finally asked the question no one else ever dared to ask. "Do you ever wonder," he said gently, "if there's more to what happened to him?" My breath caught, because yes, I had wondered. But loving the dead is easier than facing truths that might change how you remember them. Standing there beside Callum, I realized something terrifying. This trip wasn't just about closure anymore. It was about choosing between loyalty to the man I buried and the life quietly asking me to live again. Sleep refused to come. I lay awake in the small guest room, listening to the wind press against the window like it was trying to speak. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kwame Osei's face, not as he was at the end, but as he had been before Scotland took him from me. Alive, focused, certain. By morning, I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to leave. I emailed the university in Ghana and asked for an extension on my leave. I told myself it was for closure, for peace. Not because a part of me wanted to stay close to the man who made grief feel lighter. Callum didn't ask why I was still around. He simply adjusted his schedule and said, "Then we'll take things slowly." Those words stayed with me. Slowly. We spent our days walking the site Kwame had loved so much. Callum showed me sections of the dig my husband had worked on, explaining things with care, never lecturing, never assuming I wanted details I wasn't ready to hear. But the more time I spent there, the more something felt wrong. Kwame had been cautious, methodical. He never took unnecessary risks. Yet, the report said he ignored safety protocols. That didn't sound like my husband. One afternoon, as rain soaked the ground and workers retreated indoors, I noticed something strange in the site records Callum was reviewing. The date didn't match. The log claimed Kwame was alone the day of the collapse. I knew that wasn't true. Kwame had called me that morning. He'd mentioned meeting someone important. When I pointed it out, Callum went quiet. Too quiet. He said eventually, "That shouldn't be there." The air between us shifted. For the first time since I arrived, Callum looked uneasy. "Who else was on site that day?" I asked. Callum hesitated, just long enough for fear to creep in. "There were discussions happening," he said carefully. "Professional disagreements, funding issues." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Kwame hadn't just died, he had been in the middle of something. That evening, as we sat in a quiet cafe, Callum finally said what I wasn't ready to hear. "If you keep looking," he warned gently, "you might uncover things that change how you remember him." I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw not just kindness, but concern, because this wasn't just about my husband anymore. It was about the living man sitting across from me. The man's presence was slowly pulling me out of grief, even as the past tightened its grip. I realized then that love at this stage of life didn't arrive loudly. It arrived carefully, and sometimes dangerously. That night, I opened Kwame's old laptop for the first time in a year. And what I found there would make leaving Scotland impossible. Kwame's laptop took longer than I expected to open. The screen flickered, as if it hesitated to wake after a year of silence. My hands trembled as I entered the password, the same one he'd used for everything. Our anniversary, as if love itself had been the key to his life. The desktop loaded. Folders, notes, dates, and then a file I had never seen before. It wasn't labeled clearly, just a string of numbers and letters, professional, deliberate, hidden. When I opened it, my chest tightened. Kwame had been documenting conflicts. Emails between departments, funding disputes, arguments over ownership of findings, and one name appeared again and again. Someone senior, someone powerful, someone who wanted credit for discoveries Kwame refused to hand over. This wasn't reckless curiosity. This was resistance. My husband hadn't been careless. He had been in the way. The realization sat heavy in my chest, pressing against grief that had never truly rested. For a year, I had mourned a man lost to fate. Now, I was being forced to mourn a man who may have been betrayed. When I met Callum the next morning, I didn't know how much to tell him. He noticed immediately. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said. "I didn't," I replied. We walked in silence for a while, the ground damp beneath our boots. The site looked ordinary in daylight, too ordinary for the secrets it held. "I found something," I finally said. Callum stopped. Not abruptly, not dramatically, but his body stiffened in a way that told me he had been expecting this moment. I showed him the files. As he read, his jaw tightened. "This was never shared with the board," he said quietly, "and it should have been." "So they lied," I whispered. "Yes." The word landed between us like a stone dropped into water. I wanted anger, outrage, something loud. Instead, what I felt was betrayal, slow and suffocating. Kwame had trusted these people. I turned to Callum. "How involved were you?" The question hurt me as soon as I asked it. But grief has a way of demanding honesty, even if it risks destroying comfort. Callum didn't flinch. "I wasn't part of the decision-making," he said, "but I knew there was pressure on him." "Did you know he was scared?" He swallowed. "Yes." That answer broke something inside me, because I had been planning dinners, sending messages, talking about coming home, while my husband had been standing alone against forces he didn't tell me about. "I loved him," I said softly, "and I didn't protect him." Callum stepped closer, careful, as if I might shatter. "You don't owe the dead perfection. You owe them truth." The word stayed with me long after we parted ways. That evening, as rain fell steadily outside my window, I made a decision I could no longer avoid. I would not leave Scotland. Not yet. Because loving Kwame Osei meant preserving a comforting lie, and whatever was buried at that site had taken my husband with it. The message came at dawn. "Stop digging, or you'll join him." Callum didn't show me the message immediately. I noticed something was wrong the moment I saw his face, drawn, pale, guarded in a way I hadn't seen before. He tried to speak normally, but his voice carried tension like a crack beneath glass. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just work." But grief sharpens instinct. By midday, the site felt different. Workers whispered. Conversations ended when I approached. I felt watched, not openly, but enough to keep my shoulders tight. It wasn't until we were alone that Callum finally told me. He handed me his phone. One message, no sender, no number, a threat. My chest tightened as I read it again. "Stop digging, or you'll join him." "They're scared," I whispered. "Yes," Callum said, "and that makes them dangerous." For the first time, fear outweighed my grief. This wasn't academic politics anymore. This was personal. That evening, Callum insisted on walking me back to my lodging. The air between us felt heavier, charged with unspoken truths. "I never wanted you involved in this," he said quietly, "but you are already here. I've been here since the day Kwame died. I just didn't know it." We stood outside my door longer than necessary. I wanted comfort. He wanted distance. Not because he didn't care, but because caring now came with risk. "Mommy," he said carefully, "if this gets worse, I might have to step away." The words cut deeper than I expected, because grief teaches you how to survive loss, but not how to survive the fear of losing someone again. That night, I made another choice. I contacted a legal advocate in Edinburgh. If the truth was buried, it would be uncovered properly, on record. And if they wanted silence, they would have to work harder for it. The lawyer replied the next morning. Her message was polite, professional, cautious. She agreed to review Kwame Osei's case, but only off the record for now. There were too many powerful names involved, she said. Too many institutional walls built to keep certain truths buried. That should have scared me. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. Callum and I began meeting in quieter places, libraries, small cafes, corners of the site away from curious eyes. Our conversations grew more careful, our silences more loaded. There was a tenderness between us that neither of us named, not because it wasn't real, but because naming it felt like a betrayal. One evening, as we reviewed more of Kwame's notes, I noticed something that made my breath hitch. A sketch, not of artifacts, but of people. Rough outlines, positions marked, dates written beside them. "This is surveillance," I said softly. Callum nodded. He was documenting who came and went. My husband had known he was being watched. The weight of that knowledge pressed down on me. How many nights had Kwame gone to sleep knowing he was in danger while I dreamed of his return? Callum reached for my hand instinctively, then stopped himself. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," I replied. So he took my hand anyway. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic, it was grounding, and in that moment I realized how deeply he had become woven into my grief, not as a replacement, but as a witness. Later that night, Callum told me something he had kept to himself. "There's pressure on me to step back," he admitted. "They're calling it a conflict of interest." "Because of me?" I asked. "Because of Kwame." The past had reached into the present and wrapped its fingers around us both. "If I stay involved," he continued, "I could lose everything I've worked for." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt the familiar ache of choice. Love after loss isn't soft. It demands courage where you're already wounded. "You don't owe me sacrifice," I said. Callum shook his head. "I owe myself the truth," he replied, "and I owe him that much too." That night, he kissed me, slow, careful, almost hesitant, not as a promise, not as a declaration, but as an acknowledgement of something that had been growing quietly between us. And I let myself feel it, because grief does not end when love begins. They coexist. 2 days later, the university announced an internal review, and suddenly, everything Kwame Osei had died protecting was about to be exposed. 2 days later, the university announced an internal review, and suddenly, everything Kwame Osei had died protecting was about to be exposed. The internal review moved faster than I expected. Emails circulated, meetings were scheduled. Names that had once lived quietly in footnotes were suddenly spoken aloud in tense conversations and hushed corridors. Kwame Osei's work was no longer private grief, it was becoming public truth. With attention came judgment. Whispers followed me, subtle but sharp enough to cut. "Too soon. She's moved on. How convenient." They didn't know that love after loss doesn't erase the dead, it rearranges the living. Callum felt it too. Invitations disappeared. Colleagues became formal. Politeness replaced warmth. Yet he never pulled away from me. One afternoon, the lawyer called. Her voice was steady, but the words carried weight. "Kwame raised formal objections 2 weeks before his death," she said. "He refused to sign over discovery rights. He was advised to stand down." I closed my eyes. Kwame had chosen integrity over safety. "He knew," I whispered. "He knew something could happen." "Yes," the lawyer replied, "and he documented it." That night, I stood alone at the site, the wind curling around me like memory. I spoke to my husband out loud, not in anger, but in sorrow. "You should have told me," I said. "I would have stood with you." Behind me, Callum waited. He never interrupted moments that belonged to the dead. When I turned to him, the choice I had been avoiding finally surfaced. "If this ends badly," I said, "I don't want you dragged down with me." Callum's answer was quiet, unwavering. "I don't measure risk the way they do," he said. "I measure regret." The review committee released its preliminary findings a week later. Negligence, suppressed objections, procedural violations. Not an accident, a failure. Kwame Osei's name was cleared. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt grief all over again, sharper this time because the truth had arrived too late to save him. That evening, Callum and I sat together without speaking. There was no celebration, only understanding. Love, I realized, isn't about replacing what was lost. It's about standing honestly in what remains. The final report was still pending, and with it, a decision that would change both our lives, whether to walk away quietly or speak publicly. The request came quietly. No press conference, no dramatic summons, just an email asking if I was willing to speak once the final report was released. They wanted my consent, my voice, my husband's story, told not through footnotes, but through truth. I didn't answer right away. Some truths don't need witnesses to be real, but others demand to be spoken so they don't happen again. That night, Callum and I walked along the river. The water moved steadily, indifferent to human grief, carrying reflections that broke apart and reformed with every step. If you speak, he said carefully, they'll dissect your life. I know. They'll question your timing, your motives. I know. And us. I stopped walking. This was the fear neither of us had named yet. I won't let them turn you into a footnote in my healing, I said. You're not a replacement. Callum looked at me for a long moment. I don't need to be, he replied. I just don't want to be hidden. The truth was, love after loss doesn't arrive clean. It arrives carrying guilt, memory, and fear, and asks if you're brave enough to hold all of it at once. I sent the email the next morning. Yes, I will speak. The report was released 3 days later. It confirmed what Kwame Osei had died protecting: improper pressure, ethical breaches, and deliberate silence. No single villain, just a system that chose convenience over courage. When I spoke, I didn't accuse, I remembered. I spoke of a man who loved truth more than recognition, of a husband who believed knowledge should never be owned, of a life that deserved more than a quiet ending. When it was over, the room was silent. Then someone began to clap, not for me, for him. In the weeks that followed, things changed. The site was shut down pending restructuring. Policies were revised. Kwame's work was cited properly, finally. And Callum made his choice. He declined a promotion that would have taken him far from Scotland's academic margins and closer to the politics that had killed my husband. Instead, he chose a smaller role, cleaner, quieter, with me. One evening, as we packed my suitcase, I paused. I don't know what comes next, I said. Callum smiled gently. Neither do I, he replied, but we'll arrive honestly. I didn't stop loving my husband. I didn't erase my grief. I simply learned that honoring the dead does not require burying the living. And somewhere between loss and truth, I loved again. Not instead of him, but because of everything he taught me about courage.